Right now, while you sleep, the Gen Z in your home is awake. Not because they are irresponsible, not because they are addicted to their phone, not because they are inconsiderate of the fact that you have to be up in 4 hours for work. They are awake because their brain, at this specific stage of neurological development, was never designed to shut down when yours does. And in the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning, while the house is completely quiet and there is no performance required of them, no roles to play and no expectations to manage, they are doing something that most parents have never seen, never been told about, and would probably completely misunderstand if they walked in on it. This is what actually happens in the dark hours of a Gen Z life. And once you understand it, you will never look at that light under their door the same way again. First, you need to understand something fundamental about the biology of this. The adolescent brain does not run on the same clock as the adult brain. This is not a choice or a habit or a cultural attitude. It is measurable neuroscience. Research published in the journal Sleep Medicine Reviews has established that during adolescence and young adulthood, the brain's circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock that regulates the sleep-wake cycle, undergoes a significant phase delay. The release of melatonin, the hormone that signals the brain to begin shutting down for sleep, occurs approximately 2 to 3 hours later in Gen Z than it does in the adults sharing the same house. What this means is that at 11 p.m., when your melatonin is rising and your nervous system is beginning its nightly wind-down, your Gen Z child's brain is in a state neurologically equivalent to your 8 or 9 p.m. They are not tired. Their brain is not receiving the biochemical instruction to sleep. And the reason you have been fighting this battle for years without winning is because you have been asking a biological process to follow a social schedule. You cannot convince melatonin to arrive early with a firm enough tone of voice. So they are awake. And here is what they are actually doing with those hours. The first thing, they are finally processing today. During the day, your Gen Z child or employee is performing. This is not cynicism. This is clinical reality. From the moment they engage with the world, they are regulating their emotional expression, calibrating their presentation, managing how much of their internal state is visible to the people around them. The demands of social navigation, academic or professional performance, and the constant low-level surveillance of digital social life require sustained emotional labor that deploys the prefrontal cortex almost continuously. Here is what most people don't realize. Emotional processing, the neurological work of integrating what happened to you during the day, labeling it, making meaning of it, and filing it correctly so that it does not stay active in the amygdala overnight, cannot happen at full capacity, while that same prefrontal cortex is also busy managing performance. The two functions compete for the same neural resources. At night, when the performance demands drop away and the house goes quiet, that processing finally has the space it needed. The brain begins doing the work it couldn't do during the day. The conversation that felt wrong at lunch is replayed and analyzed. The moment of anxiety that got pushed down during the morning is finally surfaced and examined. The emotion that had nowhere safe to land during school or work begins, slowly and without anyone watching, to land. This is not insomnia. This is not dysfunction. This is a brain doing its most important maintenance work in the only window it is given. And if you walk in and tell them to put the phone down and go to sleep, you are not helping them rest. You are interrupting a neurological process that has no other time slot available. The second thing, they are being honest with someone. At 1 a.m., there is a text thread open. It is with one person, sometimes two. And the conversation in that thread sounds nothing like the conversations they have during the day. Science has now confirmed something that every Gen Z person already knows intuitively. The mask does not come off until the external world stops requiring it to stay on. Sociologist Erving Goffman described this as the front stage and backstage of social life. The front stage is where performance happens, where roles are maintained and impressions are managed. The backstage is where the performance drops and the actual self is allowed to exist. For Gen Z, who grew up with the front stage permanently extended across every digital platform, the backstage is not a physical space. It is a time slot. It is the 1 a.m. text thread. It is the voice note that starts with, "Okay, I need to tell you something, and I didn't want to say it earlier." It is the conversation where they say the thing they thought about all day and couldn't say to anyone who was watching. Their nervous system is saying in those messages something it rarely gets to say out loud. This is actually what I feel. Not the regulated version, not the version that won't make the room uncomfortable, the actual one. When you find out they were up until 2 a.m. texting and your first response is frustration about their sleep schedule, you are measuring the right thing with the wrong instrument. The right instrument is not the clock. It is the question of who they were talking to and whether they have the space to do it somewhere safer before next time. The third thing. They are making something. For a significant portion of Gen Z, the hours after midnight are the hours of creation. The writing that never gets shown to anyone, the music that exists only in headphones, the art, the poetry, the video essay that began as a thought experiment and became something real between midnight and 3 in the morning. Here is what most people don't realize about why this happens at night specifically. The prefrontal cortex, when it is not occupied with social regulation and performance management, becomes a creative instrument of extraordinary precision. Neuroscientist Rex Jung's research on the neuroscience of creativity found that creative output increases significantly when the default mode network of the brain, the system active during introspection, imagination, and self-referential thought, is given sustained, uninterrupted space to operate without external interruption. During the day, that network is constantly being interrupted. A notification, a request, a conversation that requires a social response, a task with a deadline. The default mode network, the creative engine, never gets to run for long enough to produce anything of depth. At night, it runs, and what it produces, the writing, the music, the design, the thinking, is often the most authentic work that Gen Z person will ever create. It is also the work you will never see because it was made in a time and space you are not invited into, and for a self that the daylight version of them hasn't learned how to show you yet. The fourth thing. They are trying to understand what is happening to the world. The phone is open and they are scrolling. Not entertainment content. Crisis content. Climate, politics, economics. Something happened somewhere and they are reading about it with an expression you can't quite read from the doorway. This is the behavior most commonly misread as pure addiction or as evidence of a generation incapable of putting down a screen. And the neuroscience behind it is both simpler and more troubling than dopamine dependency. Their amygdala, the brain's primary threat detection center, received a very specific training set during childhood. A global financial crisis that restructured their parents' financial lives. A climate emergency whose timeline runs through their own. A pandemic that cancelled the most irreplaceable developmental years of their adolescence. Political and social instability so constant that it became the background noise of growing up. A nervous system trained on that dataset does not turn off its threat scanning at bedtime. It searches for information about the threats. Not because the information will resolve the anxiety, but because locating a threat feels neurologically safer than not knowing where it is. The brain, in its most ancient survival logic, prefers a known danger to an unknown one. Science has now confirmed that this pattern, sometimes called reassurance-seeking behavior in clinical psychology, is not a character flaw. It is a hypervigilant nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do in an environment that genuinely warrants it. The problem is not that they are scanning. The problem is that the scan never finds the clean data point that tells the nervous system the threat has been located and neutralized. You can rest now. That data point does not exist in the current world, and so the scan continues into the early hours. The fifth thing, they are rehearsing the conversations they may never have. This is the quietest thing they do at night, and possibly the most important one to understand. At some point between midnight and whenever sleep finally comes, they are having a conversation in their head. Sometimes they are typing a draft of it and then deleting it. Sometimes it is with you, a parent, a manager, a person who said something months ago that they are still carrying. The conversation in their head is fully formed. They know exactly what they want to say. They know the words. They know the argument. They know the feeling underneath the argument. What they do not know is whether saying it is safe. Developmental psychologist Diana Baumrin's research on parenting styles established that a child's willingness to bring their authentic concerns, fears, and truths to the adults in their life is directly correlated with whether previous attempts to do so were received with curiosity or with dismissal. Every time a young person tried to say something real and was met with, "You're overreacting," or "You'll understand when you're older," or a response that prioritized comfort over truth, the calculus for the next attempt shifted. At night, the rehearsal happens anyway. The words exist. The need to say them is real. The question is only whether there is anyone safe enough to say them to. And if the answer is repeatedly no, the rehearsal becomes a permanent interior monologue that never gets voiced, and you wonder, years later, why they never really talk to you. The sixth thing, they check on you. This is the one nobody expects. At some point during the night, before they finally sleep, many Gen Z young people do something that the adults in their house would be stunned to know about. They walk past your door. They listen for your breathing. They glance in, if the door is open, to confirm that you are there, that you are okay, that the house is as it should be. They do not tell you this. There is no language available to them that doesn't sound strange or childish or needy in a way they are not ready to claim. But the behavior is documented in clinical settings and in qualitative research on young adult attachment. A generation raised with ambient uncertainty, whose childhood included watching trusted systems fail and trusted adults struggle, developed a particular form of hypervigilant attachment that expresses itself in precisely this way. They worry about you, about your health, about your stress, about things you think you are hiding successfully, but which their nervous system, attuned to micro-signals of adult distress from years of watching and reading and trying to know whether the ground was safe, has already detected and filed away. The check at the door is not neediness. It is love expressed in the only form available to a person who has not yet learned how to say it out loud. It is a nervous system making sure that the person who anchors its sense of safety in the world is still there. So here is the question. Now that you know all of this, when you see the light under their door at 1 a.m., what do you do with it? The wrong answer is the predictable one. The sharp knock, the instruction, the frustration framed as concern. You have to be up in 4 hours. This is not healthy. You need to get your schedule together. That response lands every time as confirmation that the world behind the door is not safe enough for what is actually happening inside the room. The right answer is not complicated, but it requires something harder than discipline. It requires the willingness to knock softly and ask with genuine curiosity and zero agenda how they are doing. To sit on the edge of the bed for 5 minutes with nothing to fix and nothing to solve. To receive whatever version of an answer they give without immediately redirecting it towards sleep schedules or morning responsibilities. Because here is what science has now confirmed and what the data on Gen Z emotional health makes unmistakably clear. The most powerful protective factor against anxiety, depression, and long-term psychological difficulty in a young person is not medication, not sleep hygiene protocols, not reduced screen time. It is the felt experience of having at least one adult in their life who can tolerate the full truth of what they are going through without needing it to be smaller, tidier, or easier to hold. That 5 minutes at 1 a.m. when you chose to knock softly instead of sharply, when you sat down instead of standing in the doorway, when you stayed long enough to hear something real, is not a parenting mistake.